Congratulations! You've just signed the articles, sworn your oath, however reluctantly, and joined a pirate crew. The year is 1718, the golden age of piracy. The good news, if you can call it that, is you're free from naval discipline or merchant ship tyranny. The bad news, your new home is a floating coffin, and the rats are already eyeing your meager possessions. Your living quarters are not a spacious cabin. They are a cramped, perpetually damp and utterly squalid space below deck, shared with dozens, sometimes hundreds of unwashed, desperate men. Imagine a sardine can, but with more body odor and less ventilation. Hammocks, if you're lucky enough to have one, are slung so close together that you can feel your neighbor's every restless twitch, their every cough. There's no privacy, no personal space, just a constant, suffocating proximity to human misery. Every surface is sticky with grime, permeated by the pervasive stench of unwashed bodies, stale rum, vomit, and the ever-present aroma of bilge water, a noxious cocktail of rot, human waste, and stagnant seawater. The very air you breathe is a thick, humid brew of human exhalations and decay, a constant assault on your senses. The air itself is thick, heavy with the smell of unwashed wool, sweat, and the faint, sweet, sickly odor of disease. Ventilation is almost non-existent, making the heat below deck unbearable in tropical climates and the cold bone-chilling in rough seas. Light is a rare luxury, provided only by flickering oil lamps or the occasional crack in the deck, casting long dancing shadows that make the cramped space feel even more oppressive. The constant creaking and groaning of the ship, the sloshing of water in the bilge, and the rhythmic lapping of waves against the hull create a monotonous, unsettling soundtrack to your existence, a lullaby of despair. The ceaseless motion of the ship, even in calm waters, can induce a constant queasyness, turning your stomach into a perpetually churning mess. In storms, the ship becomes a violent, pitching beast, throwing men against bulkheads, making sleep impossible, and even basic movement a perilous dance. Your bed, if you can call a hammock a bed, is rarely cleaned. It's stiff with salt, sweat, and the accumulated grime of countless restless nights. Fleas, lice, and bedbugs live rent-free on your body, a thriving ecosystem of microscopic tormentors that feast on your blood. Everyone has them, from the newest recruit to the grizzled captain. You'll be scratching constantly, a maddening, persistent torment that never truly subsides. Your skin is raw from constant rubbing, your scalp a battlefield of bites and scabs. And if you develop a rash, well, too bad. There's no doctor, no hydrocortisone. You just keep on suffering, silently, as part of the collective pirate experience. The lack of clean clothing only exacerbates the problem, as the parasites find ample refuge in the coarse, unwashed fabrics, burrowing into seams and folds, multiplying with an alarming speed. The constant itch becomes part of your very being, a low-level torture that never lets you truly relax. The noise is constant. The shouts of the crew, the creak of the timbers, the flapping of sails, the crashing of waves, and the ever-present sounds of men gambling, arguing, or succumbing to sickness. Sleep, when it comes, is fitful, and rarely restorative. You wake up exhausted, your body aching, your mind dulled by the lack of proper rest. This is your new home, a floating, overcrowded, unhygienic coffin, where every breath you take is a reminder of your desperate choice. And this is just how your day starts. It only gets worse from here. The constant dampness, the pervasive smells, and the endless itch become part of your very being, eroding your sense of self and replacing it with a primal focus on mere survival. The psychological toll of this constant confinement, the lack of privacy, and the unending assault on your senses is immense, leading to irritability, paranoia, and a profound sense of hopelessness that even the wildest rum can't fully drown. You are trapped, not just by the sea, but by the very conditions of your existence. You've survived the squalid awakening. Congrats. Now your stomach clenches, a hollow protest against the meager sustenance offered. You might dream of fresh meat, crisp vegetables, or clean water, but on a pirate ship, the diet is often as debilitating as the diseases that plague the crew. It's a daily battle against hunger and the insidious creep of malnutrition, a slow internal siege on your very vitality. Food is basic, bland, and often insufficient. It's designed for longevity, not nutrition or taste. Your primary sustenance comes from hardtack, also known as ship's biscuit. These are dry, unsalted, flour and water biscuits, baked until hard has to prevent spoilage. They are so hard that they can break teeth, and so dry that they must be soaked in water or coffee if available, before consumption. They are often infested with weevils and maggots, which are simply eaten along with the biscuit. Fresh meat, as the cynical pirates would joke, a dark humor born of desperation. The taste is monotonous, utterly devoid of flavor, a persistent reminder of your desperate circumstances, a blandness that mirrors the monotony of your existence. The texture is like sawdust, a dry, gritty mouthful that offers no pleasure, only the barest sensation of fullness. Meat, if you get any, is typically salted pork or beef, stored in barrels. This meat is often months, even years old, heavily salted to prevent putrefaction. Before cooking, it must be soaked for hours, sometimes days, to draw out some of the salt, but it remains tough, stringy, and often rancid. The smell of boiling salted meat permeates the ship, a greasy, unappetizing aroma that clings to your clothes and hair, a constant reminder of the unpalatable meal to come. Fresh meat is a rare luxury, only available after a successful raid on a supply ship or a brief stop on land, a fleeting taste of what might have been, a memory of a better life. Any fresh catch from the sea, like fish, is usually consumed immediately, as preservation methods are crude, leading to rapid spoilage. The lack of variety means your palate is constantly assaulted by the same few unappetizing flavors, day after day, week after week. Vegetables and fruits are almost non-existent. Without refrigeration, fresh produce spoils quickly. This leads to the most feared disease on any long voyage, scurvy. Caused by a severe vitamin C deficiency, scurvy manifests as swollen, bleeding gums, so painful you can barely open your mouth. Your teeth turn black and loose, eventually falling out, leaving you unable to chew the already rock-hard hardtack. Your old scars reopen and bleed profusely, refusing to heal, turning into festering wounds. Your joints ache so badly you can barely move, each step a torment, each movement a protest from your deteriorating body. Extreme fatigue saps your strength, turning every task into an ordeal, every climb up the rigging a perilous challenge. Eventually, open sores erupt across your body, refusing to heal, turning into festering wounds. Your body slowly disintegrates, a living testament to the lack of essential nutrients, a grim, drawn-out demise. It's a slow, agonizing death, and on many pirate ships, it was a common, unavoidable fate, claiming more lives than enemy cannonballs, a silent, insidious killer. What about drinks? Water, if available, is stored in wooden casks. It quickly becomes stagnant, foul-smelling, and infested with algae and larvae, often tasting of the wood itself and the slime within. To make it palatable, it's often mixed with rum or ale, a desperate attempt to mask the putrid taste. Rum is the drink of choice for pirates, cheap and plentiful, but it offers no nutritional value and contributes to dehydration and rampant alcoholism among the crew. Drunkenness is common, leading to fights, accidents, and further deterioration of health, as men seek escape from their grim reality in the bottle of a bottle. Fresh water is a precious commodity, strictly rationed and often reserved for the captain or the sick, a luxury beyond the reach of the common pirate. The constant thirst, even when drinking rum, is a pervasive discomfort, a dry, burning sensation that never truly goes away, a constant reminder of your precarious existence. Cooking is done over an open fire in a galley, a dangerous proposition on a wooden ship, especially in rough seas where a single rogue wave could send flames across the deck. The food is often undercooked or overcooked, and hygiene is minimal. Rats infest the food stores, contaminating everything with their droppings and disease, running freely over barrels and sacks. Every bite is a gamble, a constant battle against hunger, spoilage, and the unseen killers lurking in your meager rations. This is the barrel of despair, a daily struggle for sustenance that slowly, inexorably grinds down your body and spirit, leaving you perpetually hungry, perpetually sick, and perpetually yearning for something better, a distant memory of a real meal. You've endured the squalor and the meager diet. You felt the gnawing ache of hunger and the constant itch of vermin. You've tasted the stale hardtack and the rancid meat. But the greatest threat on a pirate ship isn't a rival navy or a stormy sea. It's the unseen killers, rampant diseases, and the horrifying consequences of untreated injuries. Forget the heroic duels and the quick, clean deaths of Hollywood. Most pirates died a slow, agonizing death from infection or illness, their bodies ravaged by unseen invaders, their last moments spent in delirium and pain. Life on an 18th century pirate ship was a breeding ground for disease, a floating petri dish of misery. Overcrowding, poor sanitation, lack of fresh food, and the constant presence of vermin, rats, lice, fleas, created a perfect storm for epidemics. The very air you breathed was often thick with the exhalations of sick men, carrying unseen pathogens, a constant exchange of illness that no one understood. Scurvy, as mentioned, was a constant companion, a creeping horror that stalked every long voyage. Imagine your gums swelling until your teeth turn black and fall out, leaving you unable to chew the already hardtack, forced to swallow meager portions of gruel. Your old scars reopen and bleed profusely, refusing to heal, turning into festering wounds that attract flies and vermin, a grotesque display of your body's collapse. Your body slowly disintegrates, a living testament to the lack of essential nutrients, a grim, drawn-out demise. This wasn't a rare occurrence, it was an expected part of life at sea, a slow, agonizing death that many pirates witnessed or endured, a terrifying inevitability. Dysentery, or the bloody flux, was another common and terrifying killer. Caused by contaminated food and water, it led to severe diarrhea, often bloody, rapid dehydration, and a rapid decline in strength, leaving men weak and vulnerable. With no understanding of germ theory, waste was often simply thrown overboard near the ship's water intake, or simply accumulated in the bilge, ensuring the disease spread quickly and relentlessly through the crew, turning the ship into a floating hospital. The stench of dysentery on a crowded ship was unbearable, a constant reminder of impending doom, a smell that clung to everything, making the very act of breathing a challenge. Typhus and smallpox also swept through ships brought by contact with infected ports or captured crews. These highly contagious diseases could decimate a crew in weeks, leaving behind a trail of death, delirium, and disfigurement. Fever was a constant companion, a burning heat that consumed your body, a sign that your immune system was fighting a losing battle against unseen invaders. The delirium of fever often led to terrifying hallucinations, adding to the torment, making it impossible to distinguish reality from nightmare. Venereal diseases, acquired in port during moments of fleeting pleasure, were rampant. Syphilis and gonorrhea, untreated in the harsh conditions of a pirate ship, led to long-term suffering, disfigurement, blindness, and eventually madness. A night of revelry on shore could lead to years of agonizing decline at sea. A cruel irony, a hidden price for a moment of indulgence. And then there were the injuries. Life on a wooden ship, especially in battle, was incredibly dangerous. Splinters from cannonballs tearing through the hull, falling rigging, crushing limbs, accidental cuts from rusty swords or axes during drunken brawls, musket wounds from skirmishes were all common occurrences. Without sterile conditions, even a minor cut could quickly become infected, turning red, swollen, and filled with pus, spreading rapidly. Gangrene was a terrifying reality. A limb, once infected, would turn black and putrid, spreading its deadly toxins through the body, leading to excruciating pain and eventually death. The only cure was amputation, often performed by the ship's carpenter or cook, using a rusty saw and a bottle of rum as anesthetic. The screams of the patient would echo across the deck, a chilling lesson in the brutality of pirate medicine, a sound that would haunt your nightmares, a stark reminder of your own vulnerability. There were no trained doctors on most pirate ships, only a basic surgeon who might have learned his crude trade as a barber or butcher. Their tools were primitive and unsterilized, their knowledge limited to basic anatomy and folk remedies. Pain relief was minimal, often just rum or opium, barely enough to dull the edges of agony. Amputations were common, performed quickly to prevent the spread of infection, but often led to further infection, massive blood loss, or shock. Many pirates died from what would today be considered minor injuries, simply because of the lack of proper medical care and understanding of hygiene. This was the grim reality of the pirate infirmary, a place where men went to suffer, and often to die, their bodies slowly consumed by the unseen killers of the sea, a place of last resort and little hope. You've survived the squalor, the hunger, and the diseases. You've witnessed the agony of injuries and the relentless march of unseen killers. But even with all these threats, the pirate ship still needed a brutal code of discipline to maintain order. Forget the romanticized notion of a democratic pirate crew where every man had an equal say and life was a grand adventure. While some captains were indeed elected, and the articles provided a semblance of shared governance, the reality was often harsh, enforced by fear, violence, and the chilling prospect of a gruesome end. The Articles of Agreement were the pirate ship's constitution, a set of rules drawn up and agreed upon by the crew. Every crew member had to sign or swear an oath to them, often on a Bible or a cutlass, binding them to the code. They outlined rules for sharing plunder, duties, and punishments, while they often included provisions for compensation for injuries, as in a crude form of insurance. They also detailed severe penalties for infractions, leaving no room for ambiguity. These articles, though seemingly democratic, were ultimately designed to maintain order and ensure the ship's effectiveness as a raiding vessel, a floating military unit. Discipline was swift, brutal, and often public, designed to serve as a terrifying deterrent. Any challenge to the captain's authority, cowardice in battle, theft from a comrade, or breaking the articles could lead to brutal punishment, meted out without hesitation. The message was clear: obedience or suffer. Flogging, whipping with a cat of 9 tails, a whip with 9 knotted cords, each tipped with a knot or metal barb, was a common punishment for minor offenses, leaving deep, painful lacerations on the back. The screams of the victim, echoing across the deck, served as a chilling warning to others, a public spectacle of pain. The skin would be torn, leaving permanent scars, a visible mark of transgression. Keel hauling. Though less common by the golden age of piracy, this terrifying punishment was still a feared legend, a threat hanging over every disobedient pirate. It involved dragging a man under the ship's keel from one side to the other. The barnacles and sharp edges of the hull would strip the flesh from his body, often resulting in death from drowning, severe mutilation, or subsequent infection. It was a slow agonizing torment designed to break a man's spirit and body, a truly horrific fate. Marooning, this was perhaps the most feared punishment, a slow death sentence delivered by isolation. A disobedient pirate would be left on a deserted, uninhabited island, with only a pistol, often with a single shot to end his own misery, a small amount of water, and perhaps a single biscuit. It was a slow, agonizing death by starvation, thirst, exposure, or the gnawing despair of utter isolation. A chilling testament to the unforgiving nature of pirate justice. The sight of a marooned man left to his fate on a tiny speck of land was a powerful, unforgettable warning. Execution for serious offenses like mutiny, murder of a fellow pirate, or repeated insubordination. The ultimate punishment was death, usually by hanging. While pirates often avoided killing their own, a captain who lost control or faced a direct challenge could be ruthless in asserting his authority. These executions were sometimes performed publicly on deck or in port to set an example, a grim final act. The captain's authority, though sometimes challenged, was absolute in battle. Disobedience during a fight could mean instant death, often at the hands of the captain himself or the quartermaster, who was responsible for enforcing the articles. The constant threat of punishment, combined with the shared danger of their profession and the allure of plunder, kept the crew in line. There was a cynical understanding that their freedom was only from the strictures of naval law and merchant tyranny, replaced by the equally brutal, if unwritten laws of the pirate code. This was not a brotherhood of equals, but a desperate alliance held together by greed, fear, and the shared pursuit of illicit gain. A fragile peace enforced by violence, always on the brink of collapse. You've endured the squalor, the brutal discipline, the gnawing hunger, and the constant threat of disease. You've seen the consequences of defiance and the grim reality of pirate justice. But why would anyone choose this life fraught with such misery and danger? For the plunder, of course, the promise of unimaginable riches, the intoxicating thrill of the chase, and the brief, intoxicating taste of power and defiance. This was the allure that drew desperate men to the Black Flag, a siren song promising escape from poverty and oppression, a chance at a different life, however short. But the reality of a pirate raid was often far less glamorous, far more chaotic, and infinitely more dangerous than the legends suggest. Forget the perfectly choreographed sword fights, the polite surrender of merchant ships, and the clean, bloodless capture of treasure chests. A pirate raid was a chaotic, brutal affair, driven by speed, surprise, and overwhelming force, designed to instill terror and minimize resistance, often relying on intimidation rather than prolonged combat. The chase. The first step was spotting a potential target. A merchant ship, often slow and heavily laden with goods, would be sighted on the horizon. The pirate ship, often faster and more maneuverable, its sails trimmed for maximum speed, would give chase, hoisting its black flag, the Jolly Roger, as a terrifying declaration of intent. The chase could last hours, even days, a grueling test of seamanship and endurance for both the hunter and the hunted. The tension on board the pirate ship would be palpable, a mixture of anticipation, grim determination and the desperate hope for a lucrative prize. The wind would whip through the rigging, the sails would strain, and the ship would cut through the waves, relentlessly closing the distance. The attack. Once within range, the pirates would open fire with their cannons, aiming to disable the merchant ship's rigging and masts, preventing escape, and to demoralize its crew. The air would fill with the roar of cannon fire, the splintering of wood, the screams of the terrified merchant sailors, and the acrid smell of gunpowder. Then came the boarding. Pirates, armed with cutlasses, pistols, axes, and boarding pikes, would swarm over the rails, a terrifying, screaming horde, often fueled by rum and desperation, their faces grim and determined. The goal was to overwhelm the merchant crew quickly, minimizing resistance and damage to the valuable cargo. Resistance was met with swift, brutal violence, designed to send a clear message to any who dared to fight back. Surrender or die. The decks would become a chaotic scene of hand-to-hand combat, blood, and terror. Nook and cranny would be ransacked, every chest broken open, every barrel inspected. But often the most valuable plunder was practical. Food, fresh water, rum, navigation instruments, sails, rope, and even the ship itself, if it was deemed seaworthy and useful. The cargo was then transferred to the pirate vessel, a messy, chaotic, and often dangerous process, with men scrambling between ships, risking falls and injury. The air would be filled with the shouts of men, the creak of pulleys, and the clatter of goods. The aftermath. What happened to the captured crew and ship depended entirely on the pirates' mood, the articles, and the level of resistance encountered. Sometimes the merchant crew would be released, perhaps set adrift in a small boat with meager provisions, a chilling act of mercy that often meant a slow death. Other times they might be forced to join the pirate crew, especially if they had valuable skills like carpentry or navigation, or if the pirate crew was depleted by disease or battle. Those who resisted fiercely or were deemed a threat might be tortured for information or even killed outright, their bodies thrown to the sharks. The captured ship might be scuttled, sunk, burned as a warning to others, or taken as a prize to be sold or used by the pirates themselves, adding to their fleet. The division of spoils was a critical moment for crew morale and a unique aspect of pirate society. The articles dictated precisely how the plunder would be divided, often with surprising fairness among the common crew. The captain usually received a larger share, often 1.5 to 2 shares, and did the quartermaster and other key officers, reflecting their greater responsibility and risk. Compensation for injuries was also stipulated. A lost eye, a lost limb, each had a set price in silver, a crude but vital form of workers' compensation that was rare in other professions. The rest of the crew received equal shares, a rare form of equality in the rigid class structure of the 18th century, fostering a sense of loyalty to the articles, if not always to each other. But the riches were often exaggerated in the legends. Much of the plunder was perishable goods, food, rum, or items difficult to sell without attracting unwanted attention. Gold and jewels were rare, and the vast majority of pirates died poor, their pockets empty. The thrill of a successful raid was intoxicating. A brief respite from the squalor and danger. A fleeting taste of power and wealth. But it was fleeting. The plunder would be quickly spent on rum, women, and fleeting pleasures in port, or gambled away in raucous taverns, leaving them with little to show for their risk. And then it was back to the open sea, back to the squalid conditions, the rotten food, and the constant threat of disease and capture, always chasing the next elusive prize, caught in a grim cycle. The freedom of piracy was a desperate, violent gamble, often ending in a slow, filthy death, a grim cycle of hardship and fleeting reward, a life lived on the razor's edge, constantly defying authority, always one step ahead of the law. But for most pirates, the story ends not with a retirement to a sun-drenched tropical island, a chest full of buried treasure, and a peaceful old age, but with the grim, cold reality of the hangman's noose. Forget the romanticized escapes and the last-minute pardons. The law eventually caught up, and its justice was swift, public, and brutal, designed to send an unmistakable message. The hunt. Has piracy flourished and became an increasing threat to global trade, disrupting vital shipping lanes and costing empires vast sums, so did the efforts to suppress it. Navies, particularly the powerful British Royal Navy, launched relentless campaigns against pirate strongholds and shipping lanes. Warships were specifically tasked with hunting down pirate vessels. Merchant ships were increasingly armed, and lucrative bounties were placed on notorious pirates, turning every sailor into a potential hunter. Being a pirate meant living with the constant, gnawing fear of being hunted, a perpetual state of paranoia. Every distant sail on the horizon could be a warship. Every seemingly friendly port could be a potential trap. The stress of constant vigilance, the fear of betrayal, was immense, eroding sanity. Capture. War was often a bloody affair, a desperate last stand against overwhelming odds. If a pirate ship was cornered by a faster, better armed warship, resistance was often futile, leading to a brutal, one-sided fight. The pirates, though fierce fighters, were usually outgunned and outmanned. Cannonballs would rip through their decks, tearing through timber and flesh. Muskets would rain down fire, and grape shot would scythe through the crew. Those who resisted too fiercely might be killed in the fight, their bodies left to the sharks. Those who surrendered faced a grim fate, often shackled and thrown into the dark, damp, and rat-infested holds of the warship, awaiting their inevitable trial, their desperate gamble having failed. Trial. If captured alive, pirates faced trial in admiralty courts, Special courts, often held in bustling port cities like Port Royal, Jamaica, or Charlestown, South Carolina, places where piracy had wreaked havoc. These were not trials designed for justice or rehabilitation, but for deterrence and swift retribution. The outcome was almost always a foregone conclusion: guilty. Lawyers were rare, often incompetent or unwilling to defend pirates. Evidence was often stacked against them, and the judges, keen to make an example and appease the merchant class, showed little mercy. The trials were often swift, public spectacles designed to instill fear and uphold the authority of the crown. A grim theatrical performance. You've journeyed through the squalid reality of pirate life, from the cramped, disease-ridden ships to the brutal punishments and the inevitable hangman's noose. You've heard the truth about their food, their hygiene, and the grim daily existence, a far cry from the adventurous tales. Now let's take a final look at how this grim reality contrasts with the enduring seductive myth, stripping away the glamour to reveal the true cost of the Black Flag and why these legends persist, captivating imaginations even today. Forget the dashing captains with their perfectly groomed beards, their flamboyant outfits, and their witty banter, always ready with a clever retort. The reality was often a man scarred by smallpox, missing teeth from scurvy, perpetually itching from lice, and smelling of stale rum, unwashed bodies, and the pervasive stench of the ship's bilge. Their treasure was often spoiled food, cheap rum, and the occasional piece of silver, quickly squandered in a drunken spree in the nearest port, leaving them with nothing but a hangover and empty pockets. Their freedom was a desperate flight from the law, constantly looking over their shoulder, living in fear of capture, a freedom defined by constant peril and the absence of any true security. The romantic image of pirates as rebels against tyranny, fighting for liberty and equality against oppressive empires, often overlooks the fundamental truth that they were first and foremost violent criminals. They preyed on innocent merchant ships, often torturing crews for information, stealing livelihoods, and leaving destruction, fear, and ruin in their wake. They were not liberators, they were predators. Their democracy, while offering more rights than a naval ship, was a brutal form of self-governance where the strongest and most ruthless often held sway, and dissent was met with swift, unforgiving violence, often leading to marooning or death, far from any true justice. The allure of pirate gold was a powerful motivator, a promise of escape from poverty and a chance at a life of ease. But the reality was that most pirates died poor, their plunder spent on fleeting pleasures or lost to the sea. The few who amassed significant wealth rarely lived long enough to enjoy it, often captured or killed before they could retire. The pirate's life was not one of adventure and riches, but of constant hardship, pervasive disease, and the pervasive stench of death, punctuated by brief, violent bursts of activity, a cycle of suffering and fleeting reward. So tonight, as you drift off to sleep, perhaps you'll ponder the true cost of that romanticized freedom. The real pirates were desperate men, driven by poverty, circumstance, and a thirst for a fleeting taste of power, who chose a life of extreme danger for fleeting rewards, and who almost universally met a grim, unglamorous end. You wouldn't have lasted a day on a pirate ship, and perhaps, after hearing the truth, you wouldn't want to. Their story, in all its brutal, filthy glory, lives on, a chilling reminder of the dark side of the high seas, a testament to the enduring power of myth over grim reality, and a stark contrast to the comfortable bed you now lie in. Congratulations, you've just made a choice. Perhaps you were a desperate sailor, flogged and starved on a merchant ship, driven to mutiny by unbearable conditions and tyrannical officers. Perhaps a condemned criminal, escaping the hangman's noose in Port Royal or London, with nothing left to lose but your life. Or maybe a disillusioned soldier, tired of fighting for kings who cared nothing for your life, only for their distant empires. Whatever your past, whatever chains you sought to break, you've heard the whispers, the tantalizing rumors carried on the trade winds from the Caribbean. Tortuga, the pirate haven, a place where men were truly free, where gold flowed like rum, and where the strictures of civilization held no sway. The year is the mid-17th century, a time when European powers vied for control of the lucrative New World, and the allure of this small, rugged island off the coast of Hispaniola is a powerful, almost irresistible siren song, promising ultimate escape from the brutal realities of the civilized world. You've endured the cramped, disease-ridden holds of ships, the tyrannical captains, the meager rations, and the constant threat of the lash. You've seen your comrades die from scurvy or dysentery, their bodies tossed unceremoniously into the waves, unmourned and forgotten. You've witnessed the rigid hierarchies of naval life, the arbitrary punishments, the soul-crushing monotony of a life lived under someone else's thumb, where every moment was dictated by a superior. Tortuga, by contrast, sounds like paradise, a true promised land, a place where you could be your own master, where wealth was seized by courage and daring, not inherited by birthright, and where the only law was the one you made for yourself, or perhaps no law at all. The psychological impact of this promise, this desperate hope for autonomy and self-determination, was immense. It was a vision of ultimate liberation, a fantasy that overshadowed any potential dangers, a dream of a life unburdened by rules or masters. The very idea of shedding the chains of society, of living by your own code, of charting your own destiny, was intoxicating, a powerful motivator that drove thousands of desperate souls across treacherous seas, risking everything for a chance at this elusive freedom. The journey itself was often a testament to this desperation, a final endurance test before reaching the promised land. Weeks, sometimes months at sea, enduring the same squalid conditions you sought to escape. The hard tack, the stagnant water, the pervasive dampness, the constant itch of vermin. But now, with a burning hope for a different future. You might have seen others succumb to disease, their bodies weakened by the voyage, or witnessed violent disputes over dwindling supplies, men driven to madness by hunger and thirst. But the image of Tortuga, a rugged green silhouette on the horizon, kept you going. It was a beacon of defiant freedom, a place where you could finally breathe, finally be yourself, finally escape the suffocating grip of authority and the judgment of society. The psychological anticipation was immense, building with every passing day, every nautical mile, every creak of the ship's timbers. You imagined thriving taverns, piles of gold, raucous celebrations, and a life lived without fear of kings or captains, a life of endless indulgence. This promise, however, was a deceptive lure, a mirage shimmering on the horizon. Tortuga was indeed a haven, a refuge for those rejected by society, a place where the king's writ did not run. But it was not one of peace or prosperity for the common man. It was a crucible of desperate men, driven by greed, violence, and a profound distrust of any authority, a melting pot of humanity's dregs. The whispers of gold and glory drowned out the screams of those who found only despair, disease, and an early grave. The dream of freedom was about to collide with the nightmare of reality, a brutal awakening. You were about to step onto a shore where the only true law was chaos, and the promise of paradise was a lie, a cruel joke. You've endured the arduous journey, the gnawing hope for a new beginning, the endless days of sea and sky. As your ship finally approaches the rugged, verdant shores of Tortuga, a sense of anticipation, mingled with a subtle unease, washes over you. The promise of freedom hangs in the air, thick with the scent of salt, stale rum, and something else, something vaguely unpleasant, a hint of decay that you can't quite place, a premonition of the reality to come. This is your debarkation into chaos, a sensory assault that immediately challenges the romanticized notions you've held, shattering them with brutal efficiency. The harbor, if it can be called that, is a scene of bewildering pandemonium. It's a chaotic jumble of ships, merchant vessels, sleek pirate sloops, and crude buccaneer craft crammed together, their masts a tangled, splintered forest against the sky. There's no orderly dock, no welcoming port authority, no guiding lights. Instead, crude, rickety jetties jut out into the murky, refuse-filled water, threatening to collapse underfoot, or ships simply beach themselves on the pebbled, garbage-strewn shores, leaving their hulls exposed. The air is thick with the cacophony of 1,000 voices, shouts, guttural curses, raucous laughter, the clinking of bottles, the distant wail of a fiddle playing a mournful tune, and the occasional, chilling sound of a pistol shot, a stark reminder that violence is always near. This is not the orderly bustle of a European port. It's a raw, untamed symphony of human excess, desperation, and unchecked vice, a discordant orchestra of anarchy. As you step ashore, your boots sink into the ground. It's not the firm, clean earth you remember from distant home. It's a perpetually muddy, refuse-strewn path, littered with discarded rum bottles, animal bones, broken pottery, and human waste. A vile carpet of filth. The pervasive stench hits you immediately, a suffocating blend of stale rum, unwashed bodies, rotting garbage, and the acrid tang of wood smoke from countless cooking fires, mingled with the sweet, sickly odor of decomposition. This is the unbearable scent of the past in its most concentrated, visceral form. A constant assault on your nostrils that makes your stomach churn and your eyes water. There's no escaping it. It clings to the very air, to your clothes, to your skin, becoming an inescapable part of your existence. The psychological impact of this constant olfactory assault is profound, a relentless reminder that you are no longer in a civilized world, but in a place where basic hygiene and human dignity are forgotten concepts, where filth is the norm. The town, if it can truly be called that, is a sprawling, haphazard collection of crude wooden shacks, makeshift taverns cobbled together from salvaged timber, and ramshackle brothels built without any semblance of planning, order, or sanitation. There are no paved streets, no public squares, no grand buildings, no churches. Just a labyrinth of muddy, winding paths leading between rickety structures, each one a den of vice and desperation, a testament to human ingenuity in squalor. The faces you see are not those of honest, hard-working folk. They are hardened, scarred, their eyes often bloodshot from drink or glinting with suspicion, their expressions etched with a lifetime of hardship and violence. Every glance feels like an assessment, every handshake a potential prelude to betrayal. The freedom here is not liberating, it's terrifying. It's the freedom to be robbed, cheated, or murdered without consequence, without recourse, without justice. The lack of any discernible law enforcement is immediately apparent. There are no guards, no constables, no magistrates, no symbols of authority. Disputes are settled by brute force, by the flash of a cutlass, the crack of a pistol, or the swing of a heavy fist. The strong prey on the weak, and justice is a matter of personal retribution, not codified law. The constant underlying tension, the knowledge that violence could erupt at any moment, from any direction, creates a pervasive sense of anxiety that gnaws at your nerves. You learn quickly to keep your hand on your weapon, to trust no one, and to watch your back, for danger could emerge from any shadow, from any drunken reveler, from any perceived slight. The psychological burden of this constant vigilance is immense, eroding any sense of peace or security, replacing it with a perpetual state of alert. Sleep, even after a long voyage, becomes a restless, fitful affair, punctuated by distant shouts and the fear of unseen threats, offering no true respite. Tortuga is not a paradise. It's a crucible, a testing ground where only the most ruthless or the luckiest survive. You have traded one form of tyranny for another, the tyranny of anarchy, a brutal, self-destructive freedom that consumes its own children. You debarked into the chaos of Tortuga, the stench of anarchy assaulting your senses, the constant threat of violence a chilling backdrop. But the immediate, most insidious threat to your survival on this paradise island isn't the cutlass of a rival pirate or the bullet of a drunken buccaneer. It's the very elements you need to survive. Water and the unseen killers it carries. Forget the notion of fresh, sparkling springs bubbling forth from pristine mountainsides. On Tortuga, water was a tyrant, a fickle master, and its caprice often meant a slow, agonizing death, a silent killer lurking in every drop. The island, while lush in parts with tropical vegetation, lacked reliable sources of clean, potable water for its burgeoning, unsanitary population. Wells were often shallow, dug hastily, and easily contaminated by human and animal waste that permeated the ground from the haphazard settlements. Rainwater collected in crude, open barrels made from salvaged timber quickly became stagnant, a breeding ground for mosquitoes, algae, and bacteria. Imagine the taste: warm, brackish, often slimy, with a faint metallic tang of rust from the makeshift containers, sometimes even tasting faintly of the very filth it contained. Every sip was a gamble, a conscious act of defiance against the unseen microbial army lurking within, a desperate prayer that this mouthful wouldn't be your last. The pervasive thirst, especially under the relentless, dehydrating Caribbean sun, was a constant torment, a dry, burning sensation that no amount of foul water or cheap rum could truly quench. Your throat would be perpetually raw, your lips cracked, your body constantly craving true hydration. This profound lack of clean water, combined with the utterly abysmal sanitation, created a floating petri dish of misery and contagion, a perfect breeding ground for epidemics. Dysentery, or the bloody flux, was rampant, sweeping through the pirate population with terrifying speed and devastating lethality. Caused by contaminated food and water, it led to severe bloody diarrhea, rapid dehydration, and a swift, agonizing decline, leaving men weak, emaciated, and vulnerable. With no understanding of germ theory, waste was simply dumped wherever convenient, into the harbor, into shallow pits, or directly onto the ground, contaminating the very ground and water sources. The stench of dysentery, mixed with the other pervasive odors of the island, was unbearable, a constant reminder of impending doom, a smell that clung to everything, making the very act of breathing a challenge. You would witness men once strong and boisterous, reduced to emaciated, delirious wrecks, their bodies racked by cramps, their last moments spent in agony, their cries echoing through the night. Beyond dysentery, other waterborne and filth-related diseases thrived. Typhus and yellow fever, carried by mosquitoes and lice that flourished in the unsanitary conditions, decimated the population, leaving trails of fever, delirium, and death. Malaria, a constant threat in tropical climates, caused recurring fevers, chills, and debilitating weakness, slowly sapping men's strength and leaving them vulnerable to other illnesses. Smallpox, brought by visiting ships from infected ports, could sweep through the crowded shacks and taverns, leaving behind a trail of death and disfigurement, its victims often dying alone and unmourned. Fever was a constant companion, a burning heat that consumed your body, a sign that your immune system was fighting a losing battle against unseen invaders, a battle it almost always lost. The delirium of fever often led to terrifying hallucinations, adding to the torment, making it impossible to distinguish reality from nightmare. A descent into madness. The lack of medical care was almost absolute. There were no trained doctors, no proper infirmaries, no pharmacies with life-saving medicines. Basic first aid was crude at best, often involving cauterization with hot irons for wounds, or crude amputations performed by a drunken shipmate or a desperate cook with a rusty saw. Infections were almost guaranteed. A simple cut could quickly fester, turning into gangrene, a putrid flesh-eating infection that spread rapidly, leading to excruciating pain and eventual death. The only cure was often a swig of rum to dull the pain, and a desperate prayer to a god who seemed to have abandoned this lawless island. The screams of the dying, the groans of the sick, and the constant low hum of misery became the island's grim soundtrack, a haunting symphony of suffering. The psychological impact of living under such constant threat of disease was profound. Every ache, every cough, every stomach cramp became a source of intense, paralyzing anxiety. You lived with the knowledge that death could come not from a cutlass or a cannonball, but from an invisible, insidious enemy lurking in every sip of water, every bite of food, every mosquito bite. This pervasive fear, combined with the physical agony of illness, eroded hope, fostered paranoia, and often led to a fatalistic resignation, a grim acceptance of an early, painful end. Tortuga, far from being a paradise of freedom, was a death trap where the very elements of life conspired to bring about your slow, filthy decay. A place where survival was a daily miracle. You've survived the debarkation into chaos, and you're battling the unseen killers of disease and thirst, their insidious presence a constant threat. Now let's talk about the constant, gnawing companion that permeated every waking moment on Tortuga: hunger. Forget the lavish feasts of Hollywood pirates laden with roasted meats and overflowing goblets. On this island, food was a constant struggle, a desperate hunt, and often a source of violent conflict, a primal battle for sustenance that drove men to the brink. Tortuga was a small, rugged island ill-suited for large-scale agriculture. Its rocky terrain and dense vegetation made cultivation difficult, and the transient, lawless population had little interest in farming. While some buccaneers might have attempted small gardens or raised a few pigs, the island's primary economy was plunder. This meant that fresh, reliable food was a rare luxury, dependent entirely on successful raids on merchant ships or the infrequent arrival of desperate traders willing to risk the journey to exchange goods for pirate gold. The reality was a diet of scarcity, monotony, and often outright putrefaction, a constant assault on the palate and the stomach. Your primary sustenance would likely come from salted meat, usually pork or beef, stored in massive, often leaky barrels. This meat was often months, even years old, heavily salted to prevent putrefaction. Before cooking, it had to be soaked for hours, sometimes days, in changes of water to draw out some of the salt, but it remained tough, stringy, and often rancid, with a grayish hue that hinted at its age and a smell that could turn the stomach. The smell of boiling salted meat permeated the crude shacks and open-air cooking fires, a greasy, unappetizing aroma that clung to your clothes and hair, a constant reminder of the unpalatable meal to come. Fresh meat was a fleeting dream, only available immediately after a successful raid on a supply ship or a brief stop on a larger island, a rare, cherished treat. Any fresh catch from the sea, like fish, was consumed immediately, as preservation methods were crude, leading to rapid spoilage and the risk of food poisoning. The lack of variety meant your palate was constantly assuaged by the same few, unappetizing flavors, day after day, week after week, leading to a profound food fatigue and a desperate craving for something different. Hardtack or ship's biscuit would also be a staple, brought from captured ships. These were dry, unsalted flour and water biscuits baked until rock hard to prevent spoilage. They were so hard they could break teeth, and so dry they had to be soaked in water or rum before consumption, turning them into a soggy, unappetizing paste. They were almost always infested with weevils and maggots, which were simply eaten along with the biscuit. Fresh meat, as the cynical pirates would joke, a dark humor born of desperation and resignation, a grim acceptance of their lot. The taste was monotonous, utterly devoid of flavor, a persistent reminder of your desperate circumstances, a blandness that mirrored the monotony of your existence. The texture was like sawdust, a dry, gritty mouthful that offered no pleasure, only the barest sensation of fullness, a temporary reprieve from the gnawing hunger. Vegetables and fruits were almost non-existent. Without refrigeration or extensive cultivation, fresh produce spoiled quickly, turning into a rotting mess within days. This meant a chronic lack of essential vitamins, leading to the pervasive threat of scurvy, as discussed earlier. Your body would slowly disintegrate, your teeth falling out, your old wounds reopening, a grim testament to the nutritional deficiencies of your diet. You would crave fresh greens, fresh fruit, anything to ward off the creeping decay, a desperate yearning for something healthy. The psychological torment of constant hunger was immense. It was a gnawing ache that never truly left you, a pervasive discomfort that dulled your mind and sapped your strength. Every meal was a reminder of your scarcity, a desperate act of survival rather than a source of pleasure or comfort. The constant competition for meager rations, the fear of food running out, and the sight of your comrades wasting away from malnutrition added another layer of anxiety to an already brutal existence. Disputes over food were common, often escalating into violent confrontations as hunger eroded any semblance of camaraderie, turning men against each other. Cooking was often done over open fires with minimal hygiene. Rats and other vermin infested any food stores, contaminating everything with their droppings and disease, running freely over barrels and sacks, gnawing at provisions. Every bite was a gamble, a constant battle against hunger, spoilage, and the unseen killers lurking in your meager rations. This was the hunger of the land, a daily struggle for sustenance that slowly, inexorably ground down your body and spirit, leaving you perpetually hungry, perpetually sick, and perpetually yearning for something better, a distant memory of a real meal. The very act of eating became a chore, a reminder of your diminished state, not a source of pleasure or comfort. Tortuga, the promised land of freedom, was also a land of perpetual hunger, a grim irony for those who sought to escape scarcity, only to find a different, more insidious form of deprivation. You've survived the squalid debarkation, the tyranny of thirst, and the gnawing hunger. You've seen how disease and deprivation slowly erode the human form, leaving behind a husk of a man. Now, let's talk about the most immediate and terrifying threat on Tortuga, the pervasive, arbitrary violence that permeated every aspect of life. Forget the romanticized notion of pirate camaraderie and honorable duels, of a band of brothers united against the world. On this island, the absence of law meant the brutal reign of the cutlass and the pistol, and survival depended on your willingness to inflict or endure brutality. Tortuga was a place without formal law enforcement, without courts, without prisons, and without any authority beyond the fleeting power of the strongest individual or the most ruthless gang. This was the ultimate freedom, but it was a terrifying anarchic liberty, where disputes were settled by brute force, by the flash of a cutlass or the crack of a pistol. And justice was a matter of personal retribution, not codified law. Every argument over a game of dice, a shared woman, a perceived insult, or a stolen piece of plunder could escalate instantly into a deadly confrontation, a fight to the death. Imagine living in a place where violence was the primary language of communication, where every interaction carried the potential for bloodshed. The air was thick with the sounds of conflict, shouts, guttural curses, the clang of steel on steel, the sharp crack of pistols, the dull thud of bodies hitting the muddy ground, the screams of the injured. These were not rare occurrences. They were the constant background noise of Tortuga, a grim soundtrack to daily life, a symphony of chaos. You learned quickly to keep your hand on your weapon, to trust no one, and to watch your back, for danger could emerge from any shadow, from any drunken reveler, from any perceived slight, from any direction. The forms of violence were varied and brutal, should be a compelling blend of calm, authority, and a subtle yet persistent undertone of darkness and gravitas. It's a voice that invites relaxation and sleep, yet simultaneously holds the listener's attention with the stark, often brutal realities it describes. Drunken brawls, rum flowed freely, and with it inhibitions were lowered and tempers flared. Minor disagreements quickly escalated into savage fistfights, often ending with knives or cutlasses, leaving men bleeding or dead in the mud. Duels. While some disputes might be settled by formal duels, these were rarely honorable affairs. They were often desperate, bloody encounters, fought with little regard for fairness or rules, ending in severe injury or death, with no seconds or doctors. Robbery and theft. With no law to protect property, robbery was rampant. If you had anything of value, a few coins, a bottle of rum, a piece of jewelry, you were a target. The strong simply took from the weak, and resistance often meant a brutal beating or death with no one to intervene, no one to appeal to, no one to administer justice. The psychological burden of this constant threat was immense. You lived in a state of perpetual hypervigilance, your nerves frayed, your senses constantly on alert, your body tense and ready for a fight. Trust was a dangerous luxury, and paranoia became a necessary survival mechanism, a constant companion. You learned to suppress empathy, to harden your heart, to become as ruthless as those around you, simply to survive. The line between victim and perpetrator blurred, as men were forced to commit violence to avoid becoming its target, a descent into savagery. Sleep, even after a long day of toil or plunder, became a restless, fitful affair, punctuated by distant shouts, the crack of a pistol, or the fear of unseen threats. Night offered no respite. It often brought out the worst impulses, fueled by rum and desperation, leading to further violence. The constant underlying tension, the knowledge that violence could erupt at any moment, created a pervasive sense of anxiety that eroded any sense of peace or security. Tortuga was not a paradise. It was a crucible, a testing ground, where only the most ruthless or the luckiest survived. You had traded one form of tyranny for another, The tyranny of anarchy, a brutal, self-destructive freedom that consumed its own children, leaving behind a trail of broken bodies and shattered minds. The island was a living testament to what happens when humanity is stripped of its laws and left to its darkest impulses. You've arrived on Tortuga, endured its chaos, its thirst, its hunger, and its pervasive violence. You've witnessed the physical decay, the brutal code, and the constant threat of bloodshed. But there was another, more insidious tyrant on the island, one that promised escape from the misery, only to deliver a different, slower form of death: rum. Forget the romanticized image of pirates swigging from bottles, singing sea shanties, and living a life of carefree revelry. On Tortuga, rum was not just a drink, it was a currency, a coping mechanism, and a pervasive curse that fueled addiction, despair, and further brutality. A liquid chains that bound men to their misery. Rum flowed freely on Tortuga, cheap and plentiful, brought in by traders eager to profit from the pirates' plunder. It was the primary form of recreation, the only readily available escape from the brutal realities of life on the island. Men drank from dawn till dusk and through the long, dark nights, their lives revolving around the next bottle. They drank to celebrate a successful raid, to mourn a lost comrade, to forget the horrors they had witnessed or inflicted, to numb the constant pain of their existence, the aching joints, the gnawing hunger, the pervasive itch. This temporary oblivion was a powerful lure, drawing men deeper into addiction, a desperate attempt to drown their sorrows, only to wake to a worse reality: rampant alcoholism. With no social controls, no consequences for excessive drinking beyond personal injury or death, alcoholism was rampant. Men would spend their meager shares of plunder almost immediately on rum, drinking until they collapsed, their bodies ravaged by the constant intake of alcohol. Chronic drunkenness led to severe physical deterioration, liver disease, malnutrition as rum replaced food, and increased vulnerability to accidents and illness. The tremors, the delirium, the constant thirst for more, these were the physical manifestations of their addiction. Fuel for violence. Rum also fueled the pervasive violence on the island. Inhibitions were lowered, tempers flared, and minor disagreements quickly escalated into deadly brawls, often with horrific consequences. Many of the murders and brutal beatings on Tortuga occurred under the influence of alcohol, transforming desperate men into savage beasts, their judgment clouded by drink. Psychological decay. Beyond the physical effects, rampant alcoholism led to profound psychological decay. Memory loss, paranoia, hallucinations, and severe depression became common. The very escape rum promised eventually trapped men in a cycle of despair, making them even less capable of coping with their reality. The initial relief gave way to a deeper, more insidious form of suffering, a mental prison built of their own making. Their minds became as diseased as their bodies. Economic exploitation. The rum traders and tavern owners, often the only respectable businessmen on the island, profited immensely from this widespread addiction, effectively draining the pirates of their hard-won plunder, leaving them perpetually broke and dependent, forcing them back to sea for more raids. The constant presence of rum, its cheap availability, and the lack of any alternative forms of recreation or coping mechanisms turned Tortuga into a vast open-air asylum for alcoholics. Men who had sought freedom from tyranny found themselves enslaved by addiction, their lives spiraling into a self-destructive cycle of drink, violence, and despair. The siren song of rum, initially a promise of solace, ultimately led to a different, slower, and equally filthy death, a grim end to the dream of pirate freedom, a testament to the fact that some chains are self-imposed. You've witnessed the physical decay, the brutal code, and the pervasive alcoholism that defined Tortuga. You understand that the island was a crucible of human suffering. But beyond the visible wounds from cutlasses and floggings, and the obvious dangers of disease and violence, there was a deeper, more insidious cost to life on this lawless island. The profound psychological toll of living in a state of perpetual anarchy, where the very fabric of human trust, morality, and sanity unraveled. Forget the romanticized notion of noble savages living freely, unburdened by society's rules. The absence of formal law, of any higher authority, meant a constant state of hypervigilance. Every interaction was a potential threat, every stranger a potential enemy, every friend a potential betrayer. This bred a deep-seated paranoia that permeated every aspect of life, making genuine connection almost impossible. You learned to trust no one, not truly, not even your closest shipmates, for greed and desperation could turn even the staunchest ally into a foe in an instant. Erosion of trust. The very foundation of human society is trust, the implicit agreement that others will generally adhere to certain norms. On Tortuga, trust was a dangerous liability, a weakness to be exploited. Promises were broken, debts unpaid, and agreements violated with impunity. This constant erosion of trust led to profound cynicism and isolation. Men became islands unto themselves, wary of all others, unable to form genuine bonds of camaraderie beyond the immediate necessity of a raid. The psychological burden of constant suspicion was immense, leading to a profound sense of loneliness, even in a crowd. Moral compromise. To survive in such an environment, one had to compromise one's own morality. The lines between right and wrong blurred, then vanished entirely. Violence became normalized, a first resort, not a last. Cruelty became a tool of survival, a means to assert dominance. Theft became a necessity, a way to acquire what you needed. The constant exposure to brutality, the need to inflict it to survive, slowly eroded empathy and compassion, turning men into hardened, callous individuals. Men who arrived seeking freedom often found themselves becoming the very monsters they had once fled, their souls stained by their actions. Pervasive anxiety and stress, The constant threat of arbitrary violence, the fear of robbery, the uncertainty of every day, the absence of any safety net, all these led to chronic stress and anxiety. Your nervous system was perpetually on high alert, your body flooded with adrenaline, ready for fight or flight. This constant state of hyperarousal led to irritability, explosive tempers, severe sleep disturbances, digestive issues, and a general decline in mental health. There was no safe space, no true respite from the tension, no moment of genuine peace. The mind was constantly racing, processing threats. Loss of identity and purpose. For many, life on Tortuga was an escape from a structured, albeit oppressive past. But without structure, without law, without a purpose beyond immediate gratification and survival, a profound sense of aimlessness and despair could set in. The freedom often felt like a void, a meaningless existence defined only by fleeting pleasures and constant danger, leading to existential dread. Men lost their sense of who they were, their past lives fading into a blur of hardship and regret. Desensitization to suffering. The constant exposure to violence, death, and human misery led to a profound desensitization. The screams of a man being flogged, the sight of a body rotting in the sun, the cries of the sick, these became commonplace, part of the background noise, no longer eliciting a strong emotional response. This emotional numbing, while a coping mechanism to survive the horrors, also eroded humanity, making men capable of greater cruelty, perpetuating the cycle of violence. Tortuga, the promised land of freedom, was in reality a psychological crucible, a dark experiment in human nature. It stripped men of their civility, their empathy, and often their sanity. The scars of Tortuga were not just the visible ones from cutlasses and floggings. They were the invisible, insidious wounds on the soul, the profound psychological decay that came from living in a world without law, without trust, and without hope. This was the true horror of Tortuga, a grim testament to the fact that absolute freedom, without the tempering hand of order, can lead to absolute despair and self-destruction. You've endured Tortuga's squalor, its diseases, its violence, and its soul-crushing anarchy. You felt the psychological toll of a life without law. But the horror of piracy wasn't confined to the island shores. For those who survived its brutal embrace and returned to the open ocean, the high seas themselves became a haunted realm, filled with the ghosts of past deeds and the chilling specter of inevitable doom. Forget the romanticized notion of pirates sailing carefree under a clear sky, singing shanties. Every voyage was a journey through a psychological landscape of fear, deep-seated superstition, and the constant, gnawing presence of death. The ships themselves were often haunted, not by supernatural specters in the traditional sense, but by the vivid, inescapable memories of those who had died aboard, from disease, from battle, from brutal punishments, their bodies often thrown unceremoniously into the waves. The cramped, damp confines of the lower decks, the pervasive stench of sickness and decay, the constant creaking of timbers, these became a sensory trigger for the trauma they had witnessed or inflicted. Every cough could be the echo of a dying shipmate, every groan the memory of a flogging, every splash the sound of a body hitting the water. The psychological burden of living in such close quarters with death, of seeing so many comrades succumb, was immense, leading to a pervasive sense of dread. Superstition and fear. Pirates, despite their ruthless exterior and their defiance of earthly laws, were often deeply superstitious. The unpredictable nature of the sea, its sudden violent storms, the vast unknown depths and the prevalence of sudden, inexplicable death fostered a deep-seated belief in omens, curses, and supernatural forces. A sudden calm, a strange cloud formation, a bird landing on the mast, a dream, all could be interpreted as signs of impending doom, of divine wrath or malevolent spirits. This pervasive superstition added another layer of psychological torment, turning every natural event into a potential harbinger of disaster, making the already dangerous sea even more terrifying. The weight of guilt. For some, the atrocities they had committed, the murders of innocent sailors, the torture of captives, the destruction of livelihoods, the betrayal of comrades, would weigh heavily on their consciences, especially in the quiet solitude of the long nights at sea. While many were hardened and seemingly indifferent, others might have been tormented by guilt, leading to nightmares, paranoia, hallucinations, and the descent into madness. The ghosts they saw were often their own victims, haunting their minds, their faces appearing in the shadows. The constant hunt. The knowledge that they were constantly being hunted, that every distant sail on the horizon could be a warship, added to the pervasive fear. The psychological toll of constant vigilance, of never truly being safe, of knowing that a brutal end awaited them if caught, was immense. Sleep was fitful, punctuated by the fear of alarms and the sound of distant cannon fire, a constant state of anxiety. This constant state of hyper-arousal eroded their mental and physical health, leading to exhaustion and frayed nerves. Isolation and loneliness. Despite being surrounded by a crew, the life of a pirate was often one of profound isolation. True intimacy and trust were rare, as betrayal was always a possibility. The vast, empty expanse of the ocean could amplify feelings of loneliness and despair, especially during long voyages without sight of land, where the only companions were the waves and the wind. The endless horizon, once a symbol of freedom, became a symbol of endless confinement, a boundless prison. The specter of the gallows. Every pirate knew their ultimate fate. The hangman's noose was a constant looming presence, a grim inevitability that haunted their thoughts. This knowledge, the certainty of a brutal public death, must have cast a long shadow over every moment of their lives. It fueled their desperate pursuit of plunder and fleeting pleasures, knowing that time was short, that every day might be their last. It bred a fatalism, a reckless abandon, and a profound cynicism, a desperate attempt to outrun their fate. The high seas, once a symbol of adventure and boundless opportunity, became a haunted realm for the pirate, filled with the echoes of past violence, the specter of death, and the chilling certainty of their grim end. The freedom of piracy was a cruel illusion, leading not to riches and retirement, but to a life consumed by fear, violence, and ultimately a slow, filthy death, haunted by the ghost ships of their own making and the specters of their victims. This was the true horror of the pirate's journey, a psychological torment that lingered long after the last cannonball was fired, a constant reminder of the price of their chosen path. You've navigated the physical and psychological horrors of Tortuga and the open sea. You've witnessed the pervasive violence and the gnawing dread that defined their existence. But within this chaos, pirates often adhered to their own code, a set of rules known as the Articles of Agreement. Forget the romanticized notion of a democratic utopia, a band of brothers living by a code of honor. This was a twisted form of justice, born of necessity and self-interest, designed to maintain a fragile order in an otherwise lawless world, a desperate attempt to prevent utter self-destruction. The articles were unique to each crew, drawn up and agreed upon by the pirates themselves, often before setting sail on a new venture. Every crew member had to sign or swear an oath to them, often on a Bible if one could be found, or a cutlass, binding them to the code. This act of signing was a powerful psychological commitment, a public declaration of allegiance to the pirate way of life, a contract written in blood and desperation. The articles outlined rules for sharing plunder, duties, and punishments, giving a semblance of structure to their anarchic existence, a thin veneer of order over chaos. Elected leadership with caveats. Unlike naval or merchant ships, where captains were appointed by distant authorities, pirate captains were often elected by the crew. This gave the crew a sense of agency, a rare form of democracy in the rigid class structure of the 18th century. However, this democracy was brutal and precarious. A captain who was deemed ineffective, cowardly, or too tyrannical could be deposed by a vote, often followed by marooning or even death. This constant threat of removal kept captains on edge, balancing authority with the need to satisfy their unruly crew, a precarious dance of power. The quartermaster, also elected, often held significant power, acting as a check on the captain's authority and overseeing the division of spoils, a crucial role in maintaining internal peace. Fair division of plunder for the crew. One of the most appealing aspects of the articles was the promise of a fair share of plunder. Unlike merchant ships, where common sailors received meager wages, pirate articles often stipulated equal shares for all common crew members, with the captain and officers receiving slightly larger portions, e.g. 1.5 or 2 shares, to compensate for their greater responsibility and risk. This was a powerful motivator, fostering a sense of shared purpose and collective greed, uniting men in their illicit pursuits. Compensation for injuries was also stipulated, a certain amount of silver for a lost eye, a larger sum for a lost limb. This crude but vital form of workers' compensation was revolutionary for its time, offering a glimmer of security in a life of extreme peril, a unique benefit of the pirate life. strict discipline and harsh punishments. Despite the democratic elements, discipline was swift, brutal, and often public, designed to serve as a terrifying deterrent and maintain order. Any challenge to the captain's authority, cowardice in battle, theft from a comrade, or breaking the articles could lead to brutal punishment, meted out without hesitation. Flogging, keel-hauling, and marooning were common, their horrors serving as constant reminders of the code's power. The psychological impact of these punishments was immense, ensuring compliance through fear, a constant, gnawing dread. The articles were not just a set of rules, they were a constant threat, a reminder of the consequences of disobedience, a silent enforcer of order. Rules of engagement. The articles often dictated rules for engaging enemy ships, for avoiding unnecessary cruelty, to avoid harsh reprisals if captured, and for managing disputes among the crew. These rules, while often ignored in the heat of battle or drunken revelry, were an attempt to impose some semblance of order on their violent profession, a pragmatic attempt to minimize internal conflict and external risk. The psychological cost of justice. This pirate code, while offering a twisted form of justice and equality compared to the naval press gangs, came at a profound psychological cost. It fostered a climate of paranoia, as men constantly watched each other for signs of weakness or betrayal. The brutal punishments, even when justified by the articles, eroded empathy and normalized violence. The freedom they sought was ultimately replaced by a different kind of tyranny, the tyranny of their own brutal code and the constant fear of its enforcement, a self-imposed prison. The pirate's code was a fascinating, horrifying experiment in self-governance in the absence of external law. It revealed both the human desire for order and fairness, and the terrifying depths of human cruelty when unchecked by broader societal norms. It was a fragile peace, maintained by the threat of violence, a grim testament to the fact that even criminals need rules, however brutal, to survive. A desperate attempt to avoid utter self-destruction. You've survived the squalor, the disease, the violence, and the brutal code of the pirate ship. You've endured the haunting of the high seas. Now the ship makes port, and the promise of land, of temporary respite, hangs heavy in the air. Let's talk about the brief, intoxicating pleasure that awaited you after a successful raid. The pirate port. Forget the romanticized image of bustling, exotic havens filled with honest merchants and charming locals. These were dens of fleeting pleasure, rampant vice, and inevitable ruin, where hard-won plunder quickly evaporated, leaving you ready and desperate for the next dangerous voyage. After weeks or months at sea, enduring unimaginable hardship, the constant damp, the gnawing hunger, the pervasive itch, the fear of death, the sight of land, especially a pirate-friendly port, was a powerful lure, a beacon of temporary salvation. These ports, like Nassau in the Bahamas, Port Royal before its destruction, or certain hidden coves in the Caribbean, offered a temporary escape from the ship's cramped, brutal confines. Here the rules of the sea were relaxed, replaced by the chaotic, permissive freedom of the shore. A brief taste of what felt like true liberty. Rum and revelry. The first order of business upon reaching shore was almost always rum. It flowed freely in the ramshackle taverns, cheap and potent, often watered down, but still capable of delivering oblivion. Pirates would drink until they collapsed, seeking oblivion from their grim reality, a desperate attempt to drown the memories of violence and suffering. The taverns would be filled with raucous laughter, bawdy songs, drunken brawls, and the constant clinking of bottles, a cacophony of excess. This was a release, a desperate attempt to forget the horrors they had endured and the dangers that awaited them, a temporary escape from their own minds. Prostitution and disease. Prostitution was rampant in these ports, a grim reality of the transient male-dominated pirate world. Women, often desperate themselves, offered fleeting companionship for a price. But these encounters came with a heavy cost. The widespread prevalence of venereal diseases like syphilis and gonorrhea. Untreated, these diseases led to long-term suffering, disfigurement, blindness, and eventually madness and death. A night of revelry on shore, a brief escape from misery, could lead to years of agonizing decline at sea. A cruel irony, a hidden price for a moment of indulgence. Gambling and squandering. Plunder, once divided, was quickly gambled away in raucous card games and dice rolls. Fortunes could be won and lost in a single night, leaving men penniless and desperate again. The thrill of the gamble, the fleeting hope of multiplying their riches, often overshadowed any sense of prudence or long-term planning. The psychology of the gambler, fueled by rum and desperation, meant that money rarely lasted. Resupply and repair. Amidst the revelry, the practicalities of pirate life continued. Ships needed to be repaired, sails mended, and provisions restocked for the next voyage. This was often done by local merchants and craftsmen, who profited immensely from the pirates' illicit gains, effectively draining their plunder, ensuring the pirates remained dependent on the cycle of raiding. The cycle of ruin. The pirate port was a place of immediate gratification, not long-term planning. Plunder was quickly spent, bodies were ravaged by drink and disease, and the brief respite quickly turned into a desperate need for more. This fueled the cycle of piracy. Raid, spend, suffer, raid again. Men rarely saved their money or planned for a future beyond the next voyage. The promise of retirement to a tropical island remained a distant, unattainable dream for most, a cruel mirage. The pirate port was a microcosm of their lives, a brief, intense burst of freedom and pleasure, followed by inevitable ruin and a return to the brutal realities of the sea. It was a place where the illusion of wealth and liberty was maintained, but where the true cost, physical decay, addiction, and despair, was always paid. The psychological hangover from these drunken debauches was often as bad as the physical one, leaving men even more desperate and hardened for the next voyage, trapped in a self-destructive loop. You've tasted the fleeting pleasures of the pirate port, only to find them hollow, leaving you with empty pockets and a ravaged body. Now, the grim reality of your chosen profession asserts itself once more. For most pirates, the story ends not with a retirement to a sun-drenched tropical island, a chest full of buried treasure, and a peaceful old age, but with the cold, hard reality of capture and the brutal, swift justice of the Admiralty courts. Forget the romanticized escapes and the last-minute pardons that populate the legends. The law eventually caught up, and its justice was swift, public, and brutal. The hunt. As piracy flourished and became an increasing threat to global trade, disrupting vital shipping lanes and costing empires vast sums in lost cargo, insurance, and prestige, so did the efforts to suppress it. Navies, particularly the powerful British Royal Navy, launched relentless campaigns against pirate strongholds and shipping lanes, deploying specialized squadrons. Warships were specifically tasked with hunting down pirate vessels, equipped with more cannons, faster sails, and highly disciplined crews. Merchant ships were increasingly armed, and lucrative bounties were placed on notorious pirates, turning every sailor into a potential hunter. Being a pirate meant living with the constant, gnawing fear of being hunted, a perpetual state of paranoia. Every distant sail on the horizon could be a warship. Every seemingly friendly port a potential trap. Every shadow a lurking threat. The stress of constant vigilance, the fear of betrayal by informants, was immense, eroding sanity and trust among the crew, turning them against each other. Capture. Capture was often a bloody affair, a desperate last stand against overwhelming odds. If a pirate ship was cornered by a faster, better-armed warship, resistance was often futile, leading to a brutal, one-sided fight. The pirates, though fierce fighters, were usually outgunned and outmanned. Cannonballs would rip through their decks, tearing through timber and flesh. Muskets would rain down fire, and grape shot would scythe through the crew, turning the deck into a slaughterhouse. Those who resisted too fiercely might be killed in the fight, their bodies left to the sharks. Those who surrendered faced a grim fate, often shackled and thrown into the dark, damp, rat-infested holds of the warship, awaiting their inevitable trial, their desperate gamble having failed, their freedom irrevocably lost. The stench of blood and fear would fill the air, a grim prelude to what was to come, a chilling reminder of their defeat. Trial. If captured alive, pirates faced trial in Admiralty courts, special courts often held in bustling port cities like Port Royal, Jamaica, or Charlestown, South Carolina, places where piracy had wreaked havoc on local economies and merchant interests. These were not trials designed for justice or rehabilitation, but for deterrence and swift retribution. The outcome was almost always a foregone conclusion. Guilty. Lawyers were rare, often incompetent or unwilling to defend pirates. Evidence was often stacked against them, and the judges, keen to make an example and appease the merchant class, showed little mercy. The trials were often swift, public spectacles designed to instill fear and uphold the authority of the crown. A grim theatrical performance for the public, a chilling display of state power. The accused, often weakened by their ordeal, stood little chance against the might of the British Empire. Their fate sealed. You've been captured, endured the grim trial, and heard the inevitable verdict. Now comes the final, most terrifying act of your pirate life: the public execution. Forget any last-minute reprieves or heroic escapes from the gallows that populate the romantic tales. For most pirates, this was the grim, cold reality of their end. A spectacle designed to terrify and deter. A final, brutal lesson. The sentence for piracy was almost universally death by hanging. There was no mercy, no second chances, no appeals, no commutation of sentence, regardless of the severity of the crime. This was a brutal, public spectacle designed to terrify potential pirates, reassure merchants, and demonstrate the absolute, unyielding power of the law. The condemned would often be paraded through the streets from the prison to the gallows, their crimes announced to the jeering or solemn crowds. A final walk of shame and terror, a public confession of their defeat. The route would be lined with onlookers eager to witness the end of a notorious criminal, a grim procession. Executions were major public events, often drawing large crowds, sometimes numbering in the thousands, eager for the morbid spectacle. The condemned pirates would be led to the gallows, often erected on the waterfront, so their fate could be seen by all who sailed into port, a chilling welcome and a stark warning to any who contemplated a life of crime. The hanging itself was often prolonged and agonizing, not a quick drop that broke the neck. Instead, victims would slowly strangle, their bodies twitching, their faces contorted in a final agony, a horrifying display designed to maximize suffering and public impact. The crowd would watch in a mixture of fear, fascination, and grim satisfaction, a visceral experience. Sometimes the bodies of particularly notorious pirates like Captain Kidd or Blackbeard would be gibbeted, hung in an iron cage, and left to rot in public view for weeks or months as a gruesome, long-term warning to others. These gibbets were often placed at prominent locations along the coast or at the entrance to harbors, serving as a permanent, decaying monument to the law's vengeance. The stench of death and decay would linger in the air, a stark, unforgettable reminder of the consequences of a life of crime, a chilling monument to the law's vengeance. The sight of these rotting corpses served as a constant, terrifying deterrent, a grim final chapter to the pirate's tale, a lasting symbol of defiance. The psychological impact on the condemned, facing such a public and agonizing end, must have been immense. The sheer indignity, the public humiliation, the prolonged suffering. It was designed to break their spirit even before their body gave out. For the onlookers, it was a visceral lesson, a terrifying demonstration of the state's power and the grim fate that awaited those who dared to defy it. The hangman's noose was the ultimate price of pirate freedom, a final, brutal irony, a chilling end to a life of lawlessness. You've witnessed the full cycle of pirate life, the squalid ship, the brutal code, the fleeting plunder, the inevitable capture, and the public execution. You understand that every moment was fraught with peril. Now let's talk about the most pervasive, yet often unspoken reality for every pirate, the incredibly short life expectancy. Forget the romanticized notions of long careers and peaceful retirements to tropical islands. For a pirate, death was not a distant possibility. It was a constant companion, an ever-present shadow, a grim expectation. The combination of rampant disease, debilitating injuries, brutal internal discipline, and the constant, overwhelming threat of capture and execution meant that the life expectancy of a pirate was incredibly short. Most pirates did not live to see old age, or even middle age. Their freedom was a desperate, violent gamble, often ending in a slow, filthy death, either from disease at sea, a fatal injury suffered in a raid, or from the hangman's noose on shore. Disease as the primary killer, as we discussed, scurvy, dysentery, typhus, and smallpox were rampant. These diseases, coupled with malnutrition and lack of hygiene, claimed more pirate lives than all the naval battles combined. A pirate might survive a dozen engagements, only to succumb to a fever in port or a lingering infection from a minor cut. Injuries and infection. Life on a wooden ship, with its heavy rigging, cannons, and sharp tools, was inherently dangerous. Add to that the violence of raids and drunken brawls, and injuries were common. Without proper medical care, even a simple cut could quickly become infected and fatal. Amputations were frequent, but often led to further infection and death, a grim necessity. Brutal discipline and accidents, flogging, keel-hauling, and other punishments could lead to severe injuries or death. Accidents such as falling from the rigging in a storm, being crushed by shifting cargo, or drowning were also common, often exacerbated by drunkenness. Battle casualties. While pirates often sought to minimize damage to captured ships and crews, battles with armed merchantmen or naval warships were deadly. Cannon fire, musket shots, and cutlass wounds took a terrible toll, leaving men maimed or dead. Execution. For those who survived the perils of the sea, the ultimate fate was often the hangman's noose. The British Admiralty was relentless in her pursuit of pirates, and capture almost always meant a public execution, a final, brutal act of state power. The psychological impact of this short life expectancy was profound. Every pirate knew their ultimate fate. The hangman's noose was a constant, looming presence, a grim inevitability. This knowledge, the certainty of a brutal public death, must have cast a long shadow over every moment of their lives. It fueled their desperate pursuit of plunder and fleeting pleasures, knowing that time was short, that every day might be their last. It bred a fatalism, a reckless abandon, and a profound cynicism. Why save? Why plan? Why build when death was always just around the corner? The romantic notion of a pirate's life was a cruel illusion, masking a reality of constant hardship, pervasive fear, and a grim, inevitable end. A stark contrast to the thrilling tales told in taverns. This was the true price of the Black Flag, a life lived fast and ended even faster. You've journeyed through the squalid reality of pirate life, from the cramped, disease-ridden ships to the brutal punishments and the inevitable hangman's noose. You've heard the truth about their food, their hygiene, their grim daily existence, and their incredibly short lives. Now, let's take a final look at how this grim reality contrasts with the enduring, seductive myth, stripping away the glamour to reveal the true cost of the Black Flag, and why these legends persist, captivating imaginations even today. Forget the dashing captains with their perfectly groomed beards, their flamboyant outfits, and their witty banter. always ready with a clever retort. The reality was often a man scarred by smallpox, missing teeth from scurvy, perpetually itching from lice, and smelling of stale rum, unwashed bodies, and the pervasive stench of the ship's bilge. Their treasure was often spoiled food, cheap rum, and the occasional piece of silver, quickly squandered in a drunken spree in the nearest port, leaving them with nothing but a hangover and empty pockets. Their freedom was a desperate flight from the law, constantly looking over their shoulder, living in fear of capture, a freedom defined by constant peril and the absence of any true security. The romanticized image of the pirate as a dashing rogue is a pure fabrication, a product of later fiction, a convenient distortion of a brutal truth. The romantic image of pirates as rebels against tyranny, fighting for liberty and equality against oppressive empires, often overlooks the fundamental truth that they were, first and foremost, violent criminals. They preyed on innocent merchant ships, often torturing crews for information, stealing livelihoods, and leaving destruction, fear, and ruin in their wake. They were not liberators, they were predators. Their democracy, while offering more rights than a naval ship, was a brutal form of self-governance, where the strongest and most ruthless often held sway, and dissent was met with swift, unforgiving violence, often leading to marooning or death, far from any true justice. The Articles were a contract of shared crime, not a charter of freedom, a tool for organizing their illicit activities. The allure of pirate gold was a powerful motivator, a promise of escape from poverty, and a chance at a life of ease and luxury. But the reality was that most pirates died poor, their plunder spent on fleeting pleasures or lost to the sea. The few who amassed significant wealth rarely lived long enough to enjoy it, often captured or killed before they could retire. The pirate's life was not one of adventure and riches, but of constant hardship, pervasive disease, and the pervasive stench of death, punctuated by brief, violent bursts of activity, a cycle of suffering and fleeting reward. The romanticized notions of buried treasure, parrots on shoulders, and peg legs are largely inventions of fiction, adding a whimsical layer to a grim reality that was far less appealing. So tonight, as you drift off to sleep, perhaps you'll ponder the true cost of that romanticized freedom. The real pirates were desperate men, driven by poverty, circumstance, and a thirst for a fleeting taste of power, who chose a life of extreme danger for fleeting rewards, and who almost universally met a grim, unglamorous end. You wouldn't have lasted a day on a pirate ship, and perhaps, after hearing the truth, you wouldn't want to. Their story, in all its brutal, filthy glory, lives on, a chilling reminder of the dark side of the high seas, a testament to the enduring power of myth over grim reality, and a stark contrast to the comfortable bed you now lie in, safe from scurvy, flogging, and the hangman's noose. You've been captured, endured the grim trial, and heard the inevitable verdict. Now comes the final, most terrifying act of your pirate life, the public execution. Forget any last-minute reprieves or heroic escapes from the gallows that populate the romantic tales. For most pirates, this was the grim, cold reality of their end. A spectacle designed to terrify and deter. A final, brutal lesson. The sentence for piracy was almost universally death by hanging. There was no mercy, no second chances, no appeals, no commutation of sentence, regardless of the severity of the crime. This was a brutal, public spectacle designed to terrify potential pirates, reassure merchants, and demonstrate the absolute, unyielding power of the law. The condemned would often be paraded through the streets from the prison to the gallows, their crimes announced to the jeering or solemn crowds, a final walk of shame and terror, a public confession of their defeat. The route would be lined with onlookers eager to witness the end of a notorious criminal, a grim procession. Executions were major public events, often drawing large crowds, sometimes numbering in the thousands, eager for the morbid spectacle. The condemned pirates would be led to the gallows, often erected on the waterfront, so their fate could be seen by all who sailed into port, a chilling welcome and a stark warning to any who contemplated a life of crime. The hanging itself was often prolonged and agonizing, not a quick drop that broke the neck. Instead, victims would slowly strangle, their bodies twitching, their faces contorted in a final agony, a horrifying display designed to maximize suffering and public impact. The crowd would watch in a mixture of fear, fascination, and grim satisfaction, a visceral experience. Sometimes the bodies of particularly notorious pirates like Captain Kidd or Blackbeard would be gibbeted, hung in an iron cage, and left to rot in public view for weeks or months as a gruesome, long-term warning to others. These gibbets were often placed at prominent locations along the coast or at the entrance to harbors, serving as a permanent, decaying monument to the law's vengeance. The stench of death and decay would linger in the air, a stark, unforgettable reminder of the consequences of a life of crime, a chilling monument to the law's vengeance. The sight of these rotting corpses served as a constant, terrifying deterrent, a grim final chapter to the pirate's tale, a lasting symbol of defiance. The psychological impact on the condemned, facing such a public and agonizing end, must have been immense. The sheer indignity, the public humiliation, the prolonged suffering. It was designed to break their spirit even before their body gave out. For the onlookers, it was a visceral lesson, a terrifying demonstration of the state's power and the grim fate that awaited those who dared to defy it. The hangman's noose was the ultimate price of pirate freedom, a final, brutal irony, a chilling end to a life of lawlessness, rebellion, and anti-heroism. Pirates are often portrayed as anti-heroes, figures who defy the established order, who are outside the law, yet possess a certain charm or a rough sense of justice. They represent a rebellion against societal norms, a rejection of the polite, often hypocritical rules of civilization. This appeals to our own rebellious instincts, our desire to break free from conformity, to root for the underdog, even if the underdog is a brutal criminal. The exotic and unknown, the Caribbean, with its tropical islands, hidden coves, and vast unexplored waters, provided a perfect backdrop for the pirate myth. It was a place of mystery and exoticism, far removed from the familiar landscapes of Europe. This sense of the unknown, of wild, untamed places, adds to the allure, allowing the imagination to run wild. The exotic and unknown, the Caribbean, with its tropical islands, hidden coves, and vast unexplored waters, provided a perfect backdrop for the pirate myth. It was a place of mystery and exoticism, far removed from the familiar landscapes of Europe. This sense of the unknown, of wild, untamed places, adds to the allure, allowing the imagination to run wild. The power of storytelling. Ultimately, the pirate myth persists because it makes for incredibly compelling stories. The human mind is drawn to narratives of good versus evil, of daring heroes and cunning villains, of grand adventures and hidden treasures. The brutal realities of pirate life, while historically accurate, are less entertaining, and so the myth endures, passed down through books, movies, and popular culture, constantly reinvented for new generations. So tonight, as you drift off to sleep, perhaps you'll ponder why the myth of the pirate holds such an enduring power over our imaginations. It's not because it was true, but because it speaks to deeper human desires for freedom, wealth, and adventure that remain timeless. The real pirates were desperate men, but the legends they inspired offer a powerful, if deceptive, escape from the mundane. This is the enduring allure of the pirate myth, a testament to the power of human imagination to transform grim reality into captivating fantasy.